Oh, I'm wired. Yeah, it won't be a very deep dive because I've only got 20 minutes. So a superficial overview of neuromorphic computing and its role in the Human Brain Project. So the Human Brain Project from the outset had these goals of understanding the brain, that's the science goal, understanding diseases of the brain, which is the medical goal, and developing future computing, which is the technology goal. And the most obvious manifestation of the future computing agenda is this development of neuromorphic computing. Now, within the HBP, there are two neuromorphic computing platforms, the SpiNNaker machine, which is hosted at Manchester in the UK, and the BrainScales machine, which is hosted in a concrete building somewhere near here. I don't know which way to point, actually. I'm not quite sure where that way. Okay, somewhere over there, not far from here. Both SpiNNaker and BrainScales were developed before the start of the HBP. They were effectively brought into the HBP, and within the HBP, development of software support and the service on these machines has continued to evolve. And we've also put a lot of resource into developing second-generation neuromorphic platforms, which will emerge over the next phase of HBP and beyond. Now, these two platforms have quite different properties. They really represent opposite ends of the neuromorphic scale. So the SpiNNaker machine is a many-core platform. Neurons are modeled in software, synapses or other bits of software. So in effect, it's like a simulation. The neuromorphic aspect of the machine is the way we connect the cores together, which allows us to maintain real-time biological spiking neural network modeling over a very large scale. The BrainScales machine adopts the more, if you like, traditional neuromorphic approach of looking at the equations that govern the evolution of the biological parameters and finding analog electronic circuits which implement the same equations. And there are very strong analogies, for example, between ion channels in biological neurons and between the currents that flow in transistors at subthreshold regions. And so the equations are mapped into analog circuits, and therefore this is described as physical emulation. And both of these systems have been designed and built from the transistor up, so both the Manchester and Heidelberg groups and our supporters, particularly at TU Dresden, have a strong background in silicon design, and this is the primary skill that we bring to this game. Now, of course, we aren't the only neuromorphic systems. Neuromorphics was conceived as a topic first by Carver Mead in the 1980s at Caltech. Industry is also involved, and on roughly the same timescale as SpiNNaker and BrainScales, IBM has developed the True North system, and rather more recently, Intel has developed their low-EHE neuromorphic platform. And you can see a scale from software at the left to analog circuits at the right. The models are more biologically realistic as you go to the right, and the ease of use improves as you go to the left. And so there's a kind of trade-off in this neuromorphic world of realism versus ease of use. And the platforms have quite different strengths and application domains, which makes them highly complementary within the HBP. So it's important to know that the timescales here are long. Developing large-scale computer systems isn't something that you can do even within a 10-year project. And both BrainScales and SpiNNaker have been in work for nearly 20 years now and will continue into the future. So you can see there was a lot of work before HBP, which really positioned the two groups. In fact, here at Heidelberg, Karl-Heinz Meyer, who led the BrainScales operation, was one of the co-proposers with Henry Markram of the HBP. So neuromorphics was a component, and it was an important component, and it built on the work that had already been done at Heidelberg. And we at Manchester had formed links with Heidelberg in an earlier EU project, and we came in and joined the HBP with our system. And these things will carry on into the future in who knows what shape or form. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of the platforms that we have and what they can do. Firstly, I'm going to look at the first generation machines. These are the machines which existed before the HBP and were brought in from the outset. And these are offered as an open service within the HBP. So if you want to run a job on SpiNNaker, there's none of this complicated bidding and getting peer reviewed. You just join the HBP community, sign up, submit jobs, and we'll run them. Because right now, we have the capacity to run all the jobs that get submitted. The machine's currently running at about an average load of about 25%. So if you get so keen that you push that up to beyond 100%, we may have to then think about more controlled ways of arbitrating access. Anyway, so the first of the first generation machines is SpiNNaker 1. This has been designed from the silicon up. The SpiNNaker chip took 5 years and 40 man-years of development work. And I always like to claim one of the strong points of chip design is you get more PhDs to the square millimeter than in most subjects, which clearly matters. Anyway, we designed this, and in fact, there are two chips inside the SpiNNaker package, the SpiNNaker processing layer, the compute layer, and an industry standard memory device. Those go in these attractive 2 centimeter square packages, and we can effectively tile a 2D surface of almost arbitrary size with these packages. The 2D surface we use is a standard size printed circuit board, which takes 48 chips, 864 processors, and that will allow you to model something roughly the scale of a small insect brain in biological real time. But we can then connect those boards together and build larger machines. And we've been running an open service on a 500,000 core machine since the end of March 2016, and just over a year ago, we upgraded this to the original target of 1 million cores. And so we now have a machine that's capable of running using fairly simplified point neuron models, something of the scale of a complete mouse brain. And there is in the HBP a mouse brain model, and we're looking at this. It's quite a tough challenge, but that's roughly the limit of what you can do on this machine. It's not the only machine in existence. We've been loaning SpiNNaker boards and then selling them when we ran out of money to places all around the world. There are about 100 boards out in the locations shown on this map. And the smallest board, which has 4 chips on, is useful for mobile robotics and similar things. The big board gets you up to insect scale, and then the biggest machine is the 1 million core machine in Manchester, which, as I said, will get you to mouse scale. And the kind of application domains where this machine is strong, well, we built it to support computational neuroscience. That was the original goal. Within the HBP, we found some very interesting collaborations in the areas of theoretical neuroscience with people such as TU Graz and University of Bern. And we can use SpiNNaker to test hypotheses of brain function on realistic brain models. And because SpiNNaker has been built as a real-time system, it's very useful in neurorobotics, and we have a number of collaborations in that space. As an example of the target application, we worked on a model of the cortical microcircuit, which was originally developed at Jülich. And this was quite a challenging biological circuit for SpiNNaker. This took quite a long time to get going. The paper at the bottom was published early last year, comparing the performance of this circuit on SpiNNaker with its performance on the Jülich supercomputer systems. And we've used this as a benchmark, and since that paper was published, we now have a new paper out which is showing roughly approaching 2 orders of magnitude improvement in the performance and efficiency of this model through tuning our software. So this has been a very useful driver for improving the capacity of the SpiNNaker system and the efficiency of the software subsystems. So that's SpiNNaker in the current version. BrainScales 1, as I say, is in a room near here. And the principle of BrainScales is to model the neuronal behaviors at a much lower level. If you look at the way ions conduct through ion channels in neurons, you get equations which look very like the RC circuit shown on the right-hand side here, which of course is very familiar, much loved by electrical engineers, and we know how to make lots of those on a chip. So we build circuits that operate in very analogous ways to the physics that's going on in the biological system. If you look at the parameters that determine the time constants of these circuits, what you find is it's very difficult to make electronics as slow as biology. The carriers in electronics, electrons, are much lighter and faster than ions, and therefore it's natural to optimize for an accelerated neuron model. And the BrainScales systems typically run at about 10 to the 4 faster than biology, so they're much faster than real time. And there are advantages and disadvantages to this. One of the advantages, of course, is if you want to model 5 years of childhood learning on a real-time system, it'll take you 5 years, and on BrainScales, it'll take you 5 hours. So there's an obvious advantage there if you pull that together. If you want to couple it to a robot, then the fact it's running 10 to the 4 times faster is a bit trickier. So anyway, these circuits generate outputs which look very like biological neurons in terms of their behavior. And in order to achieve a significant scale of neural network, because unlike in SpiNNaker, where basically the software multiplexes through the hardware so that a single piece of hardware models many neurons, if you do this physical modeling, you basically need a physical circuit for each neuron and each synapse that you're trying to model. And so to achieve scale, Heidelberg has developed mechanisms for delivering wafer scale systems where all of the chips, if you like, on the wafer, which are usually broken up and sold in individual packages, as we do with SpiNNaker. In the BrainScales case, they're all kept together and they're wired together on the wafer, so you can get a significant scale of system. And what's come out of this are things from individual chips for prototyping work, through to wafer modules, through to the full hybrid system, running accelerated. The models use adaptive exponential integrating fire neurons, which are neurons that have a very wide range of behavior. In fact, they can replicate all the behaviors observed in cortical neurons in terms of bursting and chattering and that kind of stuff. And this accelerated rate, sophisticated communications is required to keep things working across the wafer. And the system on the right, I mean, physically, it's a very similar size to the million-core SpiNNaker machine. They all sit in a row of 2-meter-high cabinets, looking very much like conventional data center hardware. And the system on the right there, I think, has 20 wafers supporting simulation. So those are the first-generation systems. Within the HBP, we've been working on second-generation systems because, of course, the first-generation systems are now quite old technology, and the world doesn't stand still. So with SpiNNaker, we're exploiting more modern process technology to implement more processors on the chip. The SpiNNaker 1 chip has 18 processor cores. SpiNNaker 2 will have 152. And basically everything on the chip is scaled up by roughly a factor of 10. So we can get 10x the efficiency and 10x the functional density. And this has been developed over the previous years of HBP, and it's being worked down to layout, and we have prototype chips on the bench that are small-scale versions of this to de-risk all the key technologies, and they're now functioning in our labs. They're not yet offering a service. That comes down the road. And if we look at what's in there, this is the techie bit of the SpiNNaker talk. It's based around individual processing elements that can be used to compute neuron and or synapse models. And the kind of tricks we're pulling on SpiNNaker 2 to make this more efficient are using techniques such as dynamic power management, so that each of the 152 processors can choose its performance and voltage level. And you can basically adjust efficiency against workload dynamically at the resolution of an individual time step, even down to 0.1 millisecond time steps. So we have very fine-grained power management on this chip. We've learned from SpiNNaker 1 that we need better memory sharing, so you get that on SpiNNaker 2. We've put on an accelerator for conventional machine learning because there's a sense that there's a synergy emerging between neuromorphics and mainstream industrial AI, and we're not quite sure where that's going, but we're building SpiNNaker 2 as a hybrid system that can support straight conventional AI as well as spiking networks. But we are putting on accelerators for the biological systems as well. And what you need for modeling biology are very good sources of random numbers and a few accelerators for exponentials and the like, connected together with a NOC, and then the really techie bit at the bottom to control the process variability in manufacture. In manufacture, we use adaptive body biasing, which reduces the variability and keeps the chips closer to the design targets. The kinds of things that have been shown on prototype chips already are quite interesting. An algorithm from Wolfgang Mass's group at Graz is deep rewiring, and this uses synaptic sampling as a mechanism. And here it's running a conventional artificial neural network. What it's showing is you can get state-of-the-art performance with a network where 99 out of 100 connections have been dropped. Okay, so you need fewer than 1% of connections to get full performance. And this kind of thing, I think, is going to have a big impact on machine learning, because machine learning at the moment runs on hardware that exploits the dense matrices in the machine learning. Biology, we know, is never dense. It's always sparse. And what we're showing here is even for machine learning, dense is probably the wrong answer, which means that NVIDIA GPUs will have to be grossly redesigned in the near future. And SpiNNaker 2 will emerge in a large-scale system. This will happen outside the HBP. TU Dresden, who are our collaborators in this design work, have received generous funding from the Saxony Science Ministry to build a large-scale SpiNNaker 2 system. And this will be used to generate all sorts of exciting large-scale models over the coming years. The second-generation BrainScales system is also, of course, building in knowledge from the first-generation system. That's why you build systems in generations. You learn from each generation and improve the next time. And BrainScales 2 has as its key idea the integration into the silicon of hardware-in-the-loop training. On the first-generation system, if you look at this big rack here, there's a very big computer in the middle of it that does lots of the work for loading things in and controlling them. But it's also where a lot of the learning happens if the networks have to be tuned to a particular application. And in BrainScales 1, this tuning, which is run on conventional computing, is done outside the wafers. And on BrainScales 2, that's going to be brought into the wafers. Turing-based computing, that's conventional computing, is used in lots of areas in this BrainScales system, despite the fact that the core model is on a non-Turing analog wafer scale system. So in BrainScales 2, a slightly different view of the structure of the system is being taken, and the analog circuits that model the spiking neurons are being viewed as co-processors to a conventional computer, which is now embedded in the chip, if you like, or in multiple points on the wafer. And this is implementing the hardware-in-the-loop learning directly down in the wafer, so that you have learning very close to the networks that you have to tune and get to learn from that. So in learning and plasticity, we're using a biologically relevant neural model. This is the adaptive exponential model, as on BrainScales 1, using relevant network topologies. So this system will support 10K synapses per neuron and more than that, which is a limitation of quite a lot of neuromorphic systems. They can't get close to biological synaptic connectivity. You need lots of bandwidth for scalability, particularly if you're running at 10 to the 4 times real time, then the communication bandwidth requirements are quite strong. And one of the fundamental problems with analog systems is you have millions of parameters on this wafer that you need to get right, and you need to adjust and tune. And a trivial solution is you work out everything ahead of time on the host computer and then load things in to get them run as intended. But a better approach is to exploit this hardware in the loop training and get the systems to tune themselves as they're in operation. And so some kind of learning or plasticity mechanism is built in at the lowest level. Feedback loops adjust system parameters. The learning replaces calibration. On a fixed analog system, there's a lot of calibration required to tune the system correctly, and learning replaces that in these kinds of applications. And the network topology itself will adjust to improve performance. And so with BrainScales 2, you've got this hardware in the loop training. You can look at the spikes that are coming out of the various neurons in the system. These can then be analyzed by the processor on the system, weights adjusted, and the system tuned to give the performance that you're looking for. And if that's whets your appetite for learning more about neuromorphics, then come back here next March. Heidelberg is host to the world's major annual meeting on neuromorphics, which is the NICE workshop, which every year so far has been held in North America. That next year, for the first time, it's leaving North America and coming to Europe, and appropriately, it's coming to Heidelberg. And that's Heidelberg, I think, when the weather's a bit nicer than today, which I guess it might be in March, and it might not. Okay. Thank you very much.